All right, so welcome all. I'm Patricia Prout, Manager of Pre-K-12 Professional Development at Maryland Public Television. We have received many inquiries from teachers about how to approach this upcoming school year. In response to your questions, we have sought the expertise of Joquetta Johnson and Jennifer Sturge. During this webinar, they will share their thoughts, expertise, and tips for teaching remotely this upcoming school year. Thank you for joining us. Joquetta and Jen, let's start with you introducing yourself and share with the Think4 community something that you think is one of the most important things educators should consider as they start teaching virtually this upcoming school year. Who would like to start first?
Take it away, Jen.
Okay. All right, thanks, Joquetta. I'm Jen Sturge, and I am the specialist for school libraries for Calvert County Public Schools. And as I think about one of the most important things that we should consider as we start the school year, I think that it is to understand that we are all in a brave new world, and that things are not going to look the way that they've looked in past years, and that's okay. And we can make it work together. Joquetta.
Hi, I'm Joquetta Johnson, and I'm a specialist in the Department of Equity and Cultural Proficiency in Baltimore County. One of the biggest things that I would like to remind teachers and educators of is that while we're all in the same storm with the pandemic and other events that are happening in our world, many of us are in different boats. So everybody's experiencing this differently. So that's going to require us to have, this is the utmost important time to be flexible and to view our work with an equity lens.
Absolutely. As we reflect on last year, what lessons do you think that we could learn from spring that educators should consider for this upcoming school year?
Joquetta, do you want to go first this time since I went first last time?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things that we can learn from this as we move into the new school year, for many school districts, it was rapid fire, right? It was like all of a sudden schools were shut down and we have 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get ready to how do we transform what we were doing face-to-face to an online environment. So I think one of the biggest things that we can take away as we move forward is that we remember that we're on an online environment, and it's more than just taking what we did face-to-face and putting it in a virtual world. It's two different types of learning environments. And I think that's why we must be very flexible in our learning and give ourselves grace when it doesn't go the way that we want it to.
I feel like from my point of view and with the work that I did with educators, classroom educators last year, one of the biggest lessons that we learned is that we really did have the tools to be successful, but that we needed to spend time really honing our craft to use those tools, and to understand that not everyone is going to be in the same place at the same time. And it really does go back to that equity lens and making sure that we are able to shift our expectations for ourselves, for our students, and for our families to ensure that we're meeting everyone's needs. Because that was one of the most difficult things, was keeping students engaged. And so how do we get that engagement level to rise as we move into the fall?
Excellent.
I was just going to add to that when Jennifer mentioned engagement, it just made me think about how often we're trying to get our kids engaged, and then that engagement looks different for many students and families. And so just because a student is signing in every day and participating, and we'll say that kid is really engaged, that's not necessarily engaged just because they showed up. I mean, that's good that they're there, but let's not discount the kid who may not be signing in as well. And then we're saying that they are not engaged because maybe they're just submitting in they may just be submitting their work. So I think that goes back to that flexibility and recognizing, again, with that equity lens, that it's going to look different for everyone and every family. And that while we're setting these expectations and goals, doesn't necessarily mean that we're lowering expectations, but I think that our first priority is also the social and emotional well-being of our students and their families. And so I think that should be at the forefront of everything that we do prior to pushing out, making sure everybody has signed in and, turned in an assignment. But how are you?
As schools began shifting online last year, teachers already knew and had established relationships with their students in their classrooms. This year, teachers are faced with learning and engaging with new students and families that they may not have had or have any type of established relationship. Would you share any suggestions on how to get to know your students and be able to begin that classroom community and relationships in a virtual classroom? Do you have any online tools or icebreakers or suggestions how to start the year that you have found that have been successful?
as we're thinking about getting started, one of the things that we're looking at are ways that we can build virtual relationships with our students in the classroom. I know a lot of teachers in our districts have discovered that the Bitmoji classroom and have spent a lot of time and effort creating these wonderful presentations using their Bitmoji to make students feel more secure. There's a lot that I've seen on Twitter about doing virtual icebreakers and having little dipsticks to find out how their students are doing, and then just communicating with parents and reaching out and saying to them, you know, I'm here for you. These are my office hours. I can email you, I can call you, using tools such as Remind, just to send little messages out to parents and to students so that they know that you are there for them. And so kind of building that virtual community in a different way, but still taking those steps to make sure that kids get to know you and that you get to know your students. Another piece that we've suggested to teachers is creating little videos about themselves to share with students when they're first logging into that virtual classroom. This is who I am. These are things I like. Kids love to know more about who you are outside of that classroom. So we're just doing it in a different manner virtually.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially when you talked about like sending the videos. And I would even go add on to, sometimes in this digital world, we forget about some of those old school technologies. Like, I just remember like the first, in teaching, they always said that the first call that a parent should get should be a positive one. So perhaps before even like, in addition to the video or prior to, how about just picking up a phone? I mean, and just calling and say, hi, I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself, you know, and build that relationship to like that personal one-on-one phone call in addition to the video. And I liked how you mentioned like sending things out through Remind. And we'll probably talk about other tools, but I'm thinking about, especially also if you have English language learners, like how are you also communicating with them? So be mindful of that. And one tool that you can use when you're sending out those communications is called talking points, because it will allow you to send out any notification in any language that you may have in your classroom, the students who speak various languages. So it's very important to also remember, again, with the equity lens and that how are we going to reach all of our students in this moment and their families?
Excellent. Well, talking about online tools, do you have any teaching suggestions as teachers can help students and parents as they're becoming familiar with just learning online in general? How to navigate a learning management system or upload a document, anything like that?
I would suggest first and foremost checking with in your school districts. Oftentimes a lot of those things already exist, and sometimes we're not even aware that they exist. And sharing those tutorials, and as Jen mentioned often as well, not just for our parents, but also for our teachers. Oftentimes we need the tools that we need are right there in front of us. So I think that would be helpful to check with your district, see what is available first. And then if not, then perhaps going out and creating some screencast or wherever you may feel comfortable. And and I know for many teachers, this is all new world for you, right? Like you got the learning management, you got the content, how I'm supposed to build. So if you don't feel comfortable creating screencasts, my go-to has always been YouTube. I promise you, there is just about any type of tutorial on any tool that already exists in YouTube. If you just Google how to use whatever that platform may be, there is something there already. So if you don't feel comfortable creating something, check and see what's already available and then share that link as well.
The only thing that I would add to that is to also, in addition to video, perhaps do step-by-step PDFs as well. I know that some people prefer to read and some people prefer to view, and some kids are not going to have the bandwidth to watch the video. So having multiple entry points for family is also a really great idea.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, that kind of leads into my next question. What should we be mindful of as we consider the students that may be in our virtual classrooms? Perhaps they're different family structures. What type of suggestions do you have and that we should be mindful as we approach that?
I think one of the things, again, just keep, for me, going back with that equity lens, as we're looking at so many tools, and there are tons of tools out there. I mean, we could spend months and years just talking about online tools. I go back to making sure that you know your, whatever learning management system, if you're having on your district, know that well. There are so many nuances to many of our learning management systems that many people don't even use it to its full capability. And then once you have managed that, then begin looking at outside tools. But be mindful too that if you are asking students to use so many tools, be mindful, is every tool going to need a password? Think about your acceptable use policies in your district. You know, for some younger kids, you can't have personal accounts if you're under 13 or younger. You know, so all of those little small nuances. I would also, as a former librarian of 26 plus years, I would also consult with my library media specialist or my IT partner to see what are our acceptable use policies as well, because that we make great instructional partners in this, right? So you don't have to do this alone if this is all new to you. And also be mindful, again, if we're creating or adding all these new tools and we have to create tutorials for parents, that's great. But think about, there's some kids at home who do not have someone that's going to be able to help them with their homework or learn that new tool. So just be mindful of that too. As am I developing this lesson, is it truly accessible to everyone? Because access does not equal accessibility. I may have access to it, but doesn't mean I necessarily can access it.
And I would say also be mindful of accessibility pieces as well. Like, does it work with a screen reader? Does it have text to speech? Is it easily clickable? Can it be used on an iPad, or does it have to be used on a computer? So those are accessible pieces to think about as well when you're choosing those outside tools. And I know, like in my district, we have a vetted list of tools. And so talking to your school librarian, you probably could get a hold of that list of tools that we have for you very easily, and find tutorials on those that have already been created. So if you're not real sure about using a new tool, talk to somebody that has used it, and just also make sure that it's approved in your district.
Excellent. So now we're going to go into the frequently asked questions. I'm going to ask you a few questions that are posed to our staff, and we'd love to hear your opinions and on such things. Our first question was about differentiating instruction. Do you have any tools or suggestions that you might be using that have been effective in an online classroom, whether they're gifted students or other types of learner? What type of tools do you think you have seen success with in an online classroom?
So one of the things, I'm sorry to jump in, but I actually have I have an answer for this one that I love. Our learning management system, we use Schoology. One of the really great things that we can do with Schoology is you can assign folders to groups of students, and so you can, and the other students don't even see who's getting what folder. And then you can also leverage the digital tools such as like Encyclopedia Britannica and our Gale databases, or whatever your district is subscribing to, or even free resources that you can find Lexiled for different reading levels, and you can the same content and come at it from multiple different points of view. Again, I would always suggest if you're having a video, that you also have the transcript to make sure your video is closed captioned, and that you are giving students different multiple entry points. And if you always design things with universal design in your mind as you're building your online classroom in your learning management system, I think you'll find that will work really well for your students.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that goes back to knowing your learning management systems, right? Because oftentimes there's so many great resources inside of our learning management systems already that we don't realize how we really can differentiate right inside that learning management system. Now, depending upon if your school district doesn't have a learning management system per se, then I think what we need to begin thinking about is, again, knowing who are the kids in your classroom, and also partnering with the areas. So if I am working with GT students, for example, checking with my GT office, what kind of things do they recommend? What tools are already available? And I love the idea of the universal design for learning, because generally what works when you do universal design for learning, it works for all of the students in that classroom. The other things is to think about too is we're in an online environment, so things don't always necessarily transfer the same way, or way I capture the information. We need to also think about how long students have already been sitting in front of a device. when we are delivering this instruction. And going back to our English language learners again, just because we put it out there, is it also accessible for all learners, right? So I love when you talked about like if it's in a PDF, is it in multiple languages? You know, like how is everyone gonna be able to have access to this information? So that's the key thing, I think, when we talk about differentiating the instruction.
Excellent. And assessment is always on everybody's forefront of their mind. How do you have any suggestions on assessing students in different non-traditional ways?
Well, I think it still goes back to, I know you need to look at your curriculum and whatever those assessment tools are, but I cannot stress enough that we are right now in the midst of a pandemic. And in addition to pandemic, we also are dealing with a lot of current events that are also maybe traumatizing our students, and kind of a lot of angst for some of our student populations. So I think a lot of the assessments that we do are fine, but I cannot stress enough to just make sure we focus on also those social and emotional well-being of our students and our families, because that's an important entry point as well, right? So yes, assess our students, be flexible, because some of our kids right now have become essential workers because parents have lost jobs, right? So some of our kids, parents are going back to school, but they now may be in daycare and may not have access to Wi-Fi at a certain time. So I think the key thing with this online learning is we have to be very flexible with our assessments. That doesn't mean we hold anyone to a lower standard. It just means we have to rethink how we are teaching during a pandemic, in the midst of this pandemic. That's the biggest piece, I think, with assessments.
I completely agree with that. And I think as you think about assessments, you also need to think about it differently. Yeah. Like, don't think about that, multiple choice test dipstick. You're thinking about having the kids show you what that they know it. Like maybe you're using Flipgrid and they're telling you about it, or maybe there's a Padlet and they are just like quickly posting, or maybe you're doing a poll using your learning management system, or maybe it's a phone call and you have that one-on-one conversation with that kid to make sure that they are really getting what you need them to be learning, and that they are feeling okay about everything that's going on, and that their emotional health is good in that moment.
Absolutely. Joquetta, you had brought up screen time. How do you, a teacher had suggested to us, how do you balance screen time and offline time? Suggestions for students and how they should manage the time between classes. Do you have any suggestions, or ones that you have found that your students have enjoyed?
Again, I don't like to do a one size fits all, because it really does vary about what you're going on. But I mean, as I always recall, even as an adult, as teachers, also sitting in front of screens, every so often we're told you need to get up and not look at a screen, right? And so now many of us, even as the adults, are spending more time in front of screens than we have in the past, right? So I think just reminding and putting in the time that, again, that goes back to, we did face-to-face and plop it online, and now say, okay, it's online learning. So I had a class this period, and I hop on every period because it's not the same thing. So I think we just need to be mindful of that. Just take a 15-minute break or 10-minute break or whatever it needs to be, but there has to be a time where you break from that screen. Every assignment also does not have to be a digital assignment, so I think that's important as well. Yes, we have all these tools and we have this digital environment. Some things can be done offline. It could be reading something, it could be watching something, it could be doing something where you observe something outside and then you come back and just upload whatever you saw or talk about it. So it doesn't always mean I need to be sitting in front of a screen to still be participating in an online and learning opportunity, right? Online learning. So I think that's important too. Again, a lot of this is a mind shifting change, right? That although it's online doesn't mean everything that I turn in or every assignment that I do has to be a digital assignment. And I think that's important as well.
One of the things that we really looked at as we were putting together our back to school plan was that screen time for students. And so all of our plans are very specific about how long the maximum amount of time an elementary student should be in front of that screen, in the middle school and the high school. And we actually in our schedules built in 10 to 15 minute breaks, and they're not students are not like going to be synchronous or on that screen, you know, for an entire day. It's like Monday and Thursday, and it's like little small chunks. And then working with our health specialist, she's come up with things that students can do to, you know, get up, you're doing some jumping jacks, or you're doing this, or you're going outside for a walk, or you're just to get them up and moving and away from that screen. When I look at what our plan is, I feel like the amount of time that students are expected to be in front of any kind of screen time learning versus when they'll be offline doing activities and hands-on things. We have plans for giving out manipulatives and stuff like that. It's very balanced, and I think that is the key consideration, is to keep that balance in that learning.
Absolutely. Another question came to us was, do you have any suggestions for teachers in setting up your virtual online classroom?
Wow.
I'm going to go back to that Bitmoji classroom.
That seems to be the trend, like hashtag Bitmoji.
Well, it could be your physical space. It could be your physical space, your lighting. It could be your what students may view from you as well. It could be all types of, any type of virtual classroom you may have.
It really could be anything. So if I'm thinking about it in two different ways. So one, okay, yeah, that Bitmoji is very cute. But the second thing is to find a structure and keep to that structure. So every classroom, virtual classroom, should have a folder that tells you where to get help. Every virtual classroom should have like a folder that's labeled with the week, and then inside of that you should have checklists so your students know what they have to do, and you know, everything should be very clear, laid out, and you should follow that format every single time so you're not changing it on them, and that things are very easy for them to find. So I look at it that way as well.
I think that's a great point. Again, when we talk about online learning and structures, as a person who's currently working on a doctorate, it's a completely online program. And I think the structure, like you said, like, so every week I know here's my go-to. Every week, one of my teachers will have like what he called the Monday memo, right? So every Monday we get a video from our teacher, right? And he recaps the things that we've covered. This is the expectations for the week. And I think those things may seem simple, but very important, especially again, if we're talking about flexibility and equity, every student may not be logging on. And if we're truly doing this with an equity lens, even if I didn't log on, I know what the expectation is for the week. I know what was covered. I had a summary, and I can click on that video if I was there or not there, because maybe I was there and still missed something. I can go back and look at that summary. So I think that setting up that online folders outside of it, making it all cutesy and inviting, which is one part of it, is also the structure, keeping in mind for also all students have access, and it's very helpful, I guess, for the parents or anyone else assisting those students, right? This is what the expectations for the week. Here's all the assignments. The same way you would do in your face-to-face in many classrooms, where you would have a folder for student was out. Here are the week's activities, right? So there are some components that we do face-to-face that we can transfer over that work well. It's just going to look a little different. And there's some things that we need to modify and balance because it is an online situation.
I also would suggest too that you look and see what your district has put in place. Like, we have put in place parameters for what every Schoology classroom has to have in it, and how it should be laid out, like with that help folder and with that checklist and with the dated folders. And so see if there is something that is in your district already that is going to give you a nice framework for how to lay your classroom out.
And I would also say, even though we're in this online environment, and sometimes we have this physical distancing, reach out to other teachers on your teams, in your schools, in your district, because you don't have to work in isolation. I mean, to a degree, while we're physical, there's something about the virtual spaces also allow us to be able to collaborate, I think, a little bit more and in different ways, right? To build those relationships. So don't feel like you have to do it alone as well. Reach out to some of your colleagues.
I think that's the best advice ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Because I think we forget, and I think, like I said, when you're structuring, give yourself grace, because people forget, like, people didn't choose to be working at home right now. You know what I mean? Like we're in the midst of a pandemic, right? And so I think teachers also need to be mindful that you are more than just the teacher. Like, that's just one of your identities. You're probably a mom or spouse, you know, kids, you know, all this, and you're trying to also probably assist with things that's happening in your household as well. So also be kind to yourself in all of that. I think, because I think we forget and we beat ourselves up as teachers because we, want to do all this, but give yourself some grace.
I love that. I guess one of our next questions would be about personality. How can you get your personality across in an online and classroom? Now, Joquetta, I see your backdrop, and I'm sure we're going to get suggestions as to where did that come from? How can I have that? But what are some ways to get you kind of convey yourself across in an online environment?
I just think be yourself, be authentic. Students know when you are not authentic. That I think holds true in face-to-face or virtual, right? Students know if you're not authentic. I mean, I think it could be something as simple as a background. It could be, I don't know, but be who you are, right? And don't try to be something you're not, right? And I think that's why it's important to make a phone call, introduce a video. I mean, if you have whatever it is you feel like, and that's why it's important to begin to know your students and have those conversations. And I always say, like, those first couple of class periods, or I said weeks, I would always just find opportunities to build rapport with my students. Like, so just be yourself. I mean, yeah, we talk about Bitmoji, but I don't want people stressing themselves out if they can't create a Bitmoji. For some people, they're just still trying to figure out how to learn their learning management system. Now you tell me you want me to do Bitmoji and all these other things, because at the end of the day, you can have the best Bitmoji and everything, and kids are still not learning, and they're still not connecting with you. So I think that's whatever you need to do to build that rapport with your student, and just be authentic, be your authentic self.
One of the suggestions that I found on Twitter yesterday that I really liked was to build in some time prior to your instruction, just to let the kids talk to each other and to you. And so that you can have those conversations and get to know each other, but also be mindful of the fact that some kids aren't going to want to turn their video camera on, and that's okay. Don't force the issue. Let them have it off. Let them lurk in the background and listen, because chances are they probably would have been that quiet kid in class anyway, and so that it's okay. So to allow that, but just to have those conversations.
Yeah, and there's I'm sure there's a lot of conversations to be had right now. So there's a lot, but I think that's important, like you said, like that almost like cafe time. Let's just have a virtual cafe. Let's just have a discussion. What's on your mind? Because again, it goes back to that social emotional learning. If we don't address what's going on, how do you expect me to effectively be able to connect with what's going on in the classroom, right? So again, I could be showing up and still be disengaged because right now maybe we're worrying about how we're going to pay our rent right now because somebody in the family's lost, or someone's could be ill, or maybe I had to work. And again, it goes back to being able to see this with an equity lens, and remember that although we're all experiencing COVID, we're all experiencing it quite differently.
Excellent. Almost our last question. Our question is, do you have a favorite online teaching tool that you think that all teachers should at least try once?
Wow.
I don't know that I can pick just one.
All right, give me two then. How about two, or anything that you think that would be helpful? I heard earlier you'd like some people do Padlet if they haven't been exposed to Padlet. Maybe that's something, but I don't know if you have any online teaching tools that you find would be. So
one of my go-tos, and no, I am not a plant, is that I always encourage teachers to use PBS Learning Media. We actually have it hooked into our learning management system. So it's just a tab on the side, and they just have to click and it goes right there, and they can assign things to their students. And partly that's because there's quick snippet videos, there's lesson plans, there's online activities and interactive things that they can go to. My other thing that I would encourage all teachers to take advantage of are the resources that their school librarian has curated for them. So those are going to vary by district, but I think if you can take advantage of those and make a good friend with your school librarian, you're going to be off to a really good start.
So I'm going to say the same thing that Jen said. The librarian is your friend. That's the human resource. That's the human resource. I was going to say PBS, but you took that. So if there was one other one, I would probably say Flipgrid.
Oh yeah.
And the reason why I would say Flipgrid, in addition to it being one that's free, just because it's free doesn't mean it's good, but this is a really good free product. It's good for all grade levels. You could differentiate your instruction with this tool, and I think that's very important. It's great even for our primary kids where they don't have to know passwords and all, because those things are very important. And it's very secure in that, you know, you don't have outside, you can build it right inside of your spaces. And I think it gives that level of interaction that students would love. And you can differentiate, you can collaborate, and they already have resources in there for you to see and figure out how to use it. So I'm going to say Flipgrid. It's like the video, it's like video chatting if you've never tried Flipgrid, but so much more. That's just a short way of explaining it, but definitely Flipgrid.
And one of the really great things about it is you can do single sign-on if your school is a Microsoft or a Google district.
Yep.
It's single sign-on, so kids don't have to know another login.
Yeah, and that's
so good.
And I think that's the big piece. We keep talking about all these tools. Like you have to really know if you have to new passwords, could it be single sign-on? And again, we don't want to bog down students with another thing, all these different tools. So just be mindful of learning the few that, you know, get a few good ones under your belt, or then give kids options. See, and I think that's when the options come in. Once you realize, oh, there's some extra tools, maybe that can be an option for a student to learn once you've seen if it's improved in your, you know, your district or whatever, and give kids options. Just, you don't have to learn all of the tools, but if it's something that as you're teaching, and that's another way to differentiate your instruction, if you have these other set of approved tools, if you don't have to teach it, but give kids the opportunity, if you want to do this, you pick any of these tools and allow them to explore and learn it on their own. And then that's another way of assessing.
I really like that.
Absolutely. Well, before we leave this webinar, what should we keep in mind as we approach the upcoming school year? Any last thoughts?
I think Joquetta said it best when she said that we need to give ourselves grace. I think that sort of sums it all up.
Give yourself grace. And I think the other part of that is self-care is so important. My boss always says, put your mask on first. You cannot be the best person you need to be for your students or your families if you don't take care of yourself first, right? And so in this online environment, I know that there's all these expectations of learn this, do this, and it's a whole new world. Like my boss always says, we're not working from home, we're at home working. Those are two different things, right? And so you have to give yourself the grace and realize it's a total different environment, and you have all these other things that's going on as well. Like I said, you have more than one identity that's just being the teacher. And you have to be able to spread all of those different identities and recognizing that, as well as your students have other obligations, their families, and the first important thing is social and emotional learning and the well-being. So always ask, are you okay? And if you're not okay, it's okay to be okay. And I think that's so important.
Well, thank you both. Thank you for your time and contributions to this discussion. And for those that are viewing this webinar, if you have any other questions that you would like answered by our expert panelists, feel free to send your suggestions to thinkport@mpt.org. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great school year, everyone.
Yeah.